It is scenario season as the college football playoff rankings dropped yet again last night. You got a new top dog in the college football landscape, a familiar logo back atop the college football playoff standings. Welcome in. This is the hard count. We talk college football, and guess what else? Nothing. College football and only college football every single day of the year. We are live 3 times a week as we are right now. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern. We're glad to have you a part of this. It is Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, the last one in history. So we got to make it a great one. Big Picture Wednesday. On Wednesdays during the season on this live show, we take an overarching view of where things stand when it comes to the playoff race and the conference race, and we give you our thoughts from a big picture scenario. Just so happens it works out perfectly with the playoff rankings dropping last night. So we'll talk about Georgia being the top dog in just a second here, but also with it being November, kind of that crispy season, if you will. You know, it's a little bit early to play Christmas music, but if you're anything like me, you've already kind of got that cranked up. Maybe, just maybe, you put up the tree. No judgment if you have or if you haven't, but maybe you're getting into that. But all those things point to scenario season being in full swing. You know what I'm talking about now. The college football playoff scenario, where those things stand as of right now. We got a lot of hypotheticals from y'all via my Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at JD Piquel. We'll give you our thoughts on some of those hypotheticals, what we think, and then also what we think the committee would do, which unfortunately ends up being the authority source in the situation. Pulse the Program series rolling right along. If you're new to the show, what we do here for the Pulse of the Program is we just kind of try and do exactly what that says, get a feel for where things stand at different situations across the country. We're going to go to Tallahassee, Florida for this one and take a pulse of what's going on with Mike Norvell and the Noles coming in at number 4 last night. I'll be honest, I thought there was a chance that Florida State would drop to 5. Now, we understand they control their own destiny, as does Washington. I think if they're both undefeated, they will be in the college football playoff. I think that's pretty safe to assume. But where are they right now internally for Florida State? Can they win a national championship? Like, that's what you're asking if you're in Tallahassee this morning. We're happy to be at 4. We're happy to be undefeated. But can we win it all? It's a fair question. We'll give you our thoughts. We'll give you our answer there. Lastly, there's a big-time clash going on the West Coast. You got Washington taking their show on the road, going to Corvallis, Oregon, to play the Beavs. Oregon State, I think, is a top 10 team in the country. The committee disagrees. But Washington, at last we checked, was actually a 1-point dog. No pun intended, because they're the Huskies. But we'll give you our pick on that one and give you our prediction when it comes to who's winning that game. Like I said, we're glad to have you here. 2 quick requests. First, subscribe to the channel, because we're talking ball and only ball all the way through the end of the season, all the way through the college football playoff, the national championship game. Going to have a lot of great on-location content for you. The best way to stay engaged with our content is to be subscribed. Second piece of that, follow me on the socials at JD Piquel, Twitter and Instagram. Right now, we are just jam-packed with content across the board here, and there's a lot of content we do on those social channels that we don't incorporate into the YouTube live show. And so if you want to be engaged as much as possible all the way around the clock with this show, follow me there. That's the best way to do that. Also, we're going to pull from y'all's thoughts and concerns and feelings about different things in college football and then incorporate it into the show. The best way for us to get a pulse for that, obviously, first, being subscribed, but second, getting at me on the socials and let me know your thoughts, your feelings, your concerns, whatever it may be. Best way to stay engaged is both of those things. So with that out of the way, we appreciate y'all being dialed in. Can't waste too much more time now. Let's get right to it. College football playoff rankings dropped last night. It was our 3rd installment in the 2023 rankings. Shout out to you if you stayed up for that. There was some basketball going on, or at least I was told college basketball, in my mind, doesn't start until March. Another video for another time. But the College Football Playoff Committee made a couple of tweaks, or I guess one rather big tweak when it came to that top 6. You had Oregon at 6. You had Washington still at 5. Now, I thought Washington did enough to leapfrog Florida State. It's not talking down on Florida State. I think it's a testament to Washington and the way that they beat Utah. Nice little ranked win. Also, they have that top 10 win over Oregon. It is what it is. If Washington and Florida State both run the table, they will be in the college football playoff. We all understand that. Florida State, you're happy to still be at 4. What we said last week is still true this week. If you handle business and if you continue to keep that donut in the loss column, you will also be in the college football playoff, much like Washington. So 4 or 5 for either of those teams. You don't worry about it. You just keep a good thing going, tip your hat, and move on. At number 3, you got Michigan. At number 2, you got Ohio State. And at number 1, you got the Georgia Bulldogs. And that's what I really want to talk about right now in this segment. To me, this was the right move based on one thing: watching football. Because if you look at resume, you could split hairs a little bit here, but you're probably still leaning resume-wise towards Ohio State. Top 10 win on the road, top 10 win at home against Penn State. Georgia, they have one top 10 win over Ole Miss, have a really solid top 15 win over Missouri at the time. Missouri now finding their way into the top 10, so maybe that boosts Georgia just a little bit. But the reality is both those wins were at home for Georgia. Ohio State went on the road and got one. So resume, again, you're splitting hairs. Two phenomenal resumes, but you probably lean resume towards Ohio State. Then the eye test for Michigan, I know there were 3 last night, but if you want to talk about just being dominant, across the board, early in the year, Michigan, I know they weren't playing anybody. I'm not talking about that, but just average margin of victory for them was 35 points. It's ridiculous. Michigan, again, early in the year, probably more dominant. But this is the right decision based on what I just said. When you watch football, this is the best team in America. And it's a nice statement on the box score with them having that 52-17 win over a top 10 Ole Miss. It's a statement. There's no way around it. But the biggest thing for me when we talk about Georgia and why we felt so strongly about Georgia being the number 1 team in the country, even before this poll, we have our own poll, the Nothing But Ball poll. And that drops every Sunday, and we talk about it on our live show on this channel. We break down our top 10 teams, so go check that out if you haven't already. Not right now, finish the live show. But what I want to make sure we say is we already thought Georgia was the best team in the country because there's no weaknesses when you look at Georgia. And that sounds hyperbolic, but legitimately, I have the least amount of questions about Georgia than I would anybody else in the country. Ohio State, you're yeah, they have a great resume, but is quarterback play going to come back and bite them at some point? Yeah, Michigan had a great win against Penn State, but I still would like to see them play a little bit better competition consistently. For Georgia, what is the one thing that you're asking about them that you really feel concerned about? Inexperience? Having to play some young guys? Injuries? Is that really what we're asking about Georgia? That's our main concern. If that's the main concern when it comes to Georgia, I think that speaks volumes to where they're at right now. Because right now, again, they have no weaknesses. Scoring 40 a game, number 6 in the country. Holding teams to 17 a game, number 7 in the country. They're top 20 in pass and rush defense. Okay, they're running for almost 200 yards a game. They're throwing for over 300 yards a game. Hat tip Carson Beck. Looks like there hasn't been a huge letdown from Stetson Bennett leaving for the NFL. What does this mean? That's great they're multiple. It's great they don't have any weaknesses. What does that actually mean when it comes to their college football playoff aspirations and where they stand in the college football landscape today? To me, it just says Georgia can win any kind of game. Hey, if we got to get into a shootout, we like Carson Beck. We got Brock Bowers back in the lineup. We got Dominic Lovett. We got Ladd McConkey. We got weapons now. If we want to play that kind of game, we can go score for score with you. Or it's a thing where we got to go field position, game control, take the air out of the football. Dejan Edwards and Kendall Milton are putting on clinics right now with how they tote the rock. That offensive line for Georgia starting to get back healthy a little bit more week in and week out. I put my money on Georgia in that situation as well. Defensively, we already said it. Yeah, they're playing some young guys due to injury. They're stepping in and playing phenomenal. And so, again, they can win any kind of game that you ask them to. That's dangerous because I promise you, when it comes to those games in the college football playoff and when they play Alabama in the SEC title game, I think that's probably an expectation that you will have to play a different style of game as your opponent gets better and better. I mean, we saw it last year in the game against Ohio State. Different roster, same Kirby Smart coached football team, had to go and go score for score with Marvin Harrison Jr. and C.J. Stroud, and they were able to do that. This team, obviously different pieces, different quarterback, different coordinator, same kind of traits, built the same way. They can still win any kind of game is where I'm coming from. And so Kirby Smart, he gets a ton of credit, and he should. He is right now the best coach in the country. I'm not saying of all time. I'm saying right now, Kirby Smart, there's nobody better. He's got 2 natties to show for it. And he deserves a ton of credit, and he's going to get a lot of credit for talent acquisition. And he should, yet again, everything that Kirby Smart is being told, or everything that we're saying about Kirby Smart, rather, as to how great a coach he is, all true. But I think the thing that maybe gets overlooked is the way that he fosters internal leadership, because you can have a lot of talent. You can have a great staff. But if your great staff doesn't empower great leadership within that roster and doesn't cultivate that, then we're missing the key piece here. We're missing the key piece. I can know what to do. I can know how to do it. But if I don't have an internal standard set by my teammate, the accountability, then what are we doing here? Again, missing that key piece, that key ingredient that's going to tie this whole thing together. And so what I think should get a lot of credit is the locker room and the guys that have taken up that gauntlet of leadership. Like Kirby Smart, if you listen to him talk, he will reference fairly frequently his leadership council, which is essentially a group of players that have taken it upon themselves and have been, I don't know if it's voted on by the team or if the coaching staff selects them, but they have been essentially dubbed the guys. You are the leaders, you are the tone setters, you set that standard, you uphold that standard. Guys like Cedric Van Prant, Ladd McConkey, Javon Bullard, guys that have been there and understand what it takes to win and are now taking upon themselves to keep that standard where it's at. And so if those guys aren't doing a tremendous job, if they're not keeping that standard where it is, then the talent is secondary. Because talent gets you in the building. Georgia has the talent to be in the room for a national title yet again. We all understand that. Bama's also in that room. Ohio State's in that room. Michigan's in that room. Florida State's probably in that room. A lot of talent. But again, if you don't have that culture and that leadership to kick the door down, it's all for naught. And so the scary thing now, yes, the culture, the standard, all those things are in place. That's why they've been as good as they have, paired with the talent. But the scary thing, I think, is this team, I don't believe, has played their best game of football just yet. Ole Miss was probably close, but I think they're even going to get better because week in and week out, they don't have the same weaknesses. And we said this on our live reaction last night to the college football playoff rankings. Like Georgia, the question early on was, well, are they going to be able to set the edge? We've seen them get gashed on some perimeter runs. That Auburn game sticks out in your mind. The Missouri game sticks out in your mind. And then Ole Miss came in running a ton of jet sweep, attacking the perimeter. Georgia, playing with some young cats, I thought did a phenomenal job neutralizing that part of the Ole Miss offense. Not that it was non-existent, but that it was a weakness previously. It didn't look like a weakness to me in that spot. In a spot where it could have been exposed if it had stayed a weakness. That tells me this is a team now. Not complacent, not ready to rest on their laurels. They're going to take strides each and every week, watch the film. They're not saying, great, we're the number one team in the country. They're not going to say, great, we're top 4. Awesome, clinched the East. Yes, going to Atlanta. Can't wait. That's not the way that they're built. They're not wired that way because of Kirby Smart and because of that locker room, because of that leadership council. Other thing I would say, that should be scary for the rest of college football. Georgia went through a phase of their season where they were without the best player in the country in Brock Bowers. I understand there's a case for a lot of other players. I would also probably label Marvin Harrison Jr. the best player in the country. I would probably also label Jaden Daniels the best player in the country. Like, that title, I think, can get passed around with some validity. Bottom line, Brock Bowers, one of, if not the best player in the country. So we're clear. Whenever he was in the lineup, you leaned on him because that's what you do with great players. Anytime you have an Avenger playing tight end for you, yeah, he's going to be a part of your offensive game plan. He'll be a focal point of the offense. But then he was subtracted from the lineup. He wasn't in there, and so what'd you have to do? You had to make up for that production. We said it a lot. As soon as Brock Bowers got hurt, hey, he was accounting for 25% of Carson Beck's passing yards up to that point. That's a quarter of his passing yards now that has to be replaced. A quarter of his decisions that he makes that has to be replaced. So, with that being said, you asked more of guys like Dominique Lovett, of Oscar Delp, of Ra Thomas, of Ladd McConkey when he got back healthy. And so when you put more weight on those guys, when you leaned on those guys more heavily, what happened? They answered the call to action. They lifted that weight. They got stronger. And so now you add Brock Bowers back into a lineup with a bunch of playmakers that got stronger, with Carson Beck, who was able to elevate his game with Brock Bowers out of the lineup. And they're firing on all cylinders. We saw them score 52 over Ole Miss. Y'all, I don't think that's a coincidence that you got Brock Bowers back in the lineup and saw that offensive explosion continue to surge against a good Ole Miss team. So what I want to make sure we say is they're only going to get better. I truly believe that. And again, we had Georgia to be our national champion before the season. We had them as our national champion after week 6. Right now, I'm sitting here telling you I don't see a weakness. I would have a hard time picking against Georgia the rest of the way. For us today, they're still our pick to win the national title until they give us a reason otherwise. So Georgia, number 1 again when it comes to the college football playoff rankings. That G is back atop the standings. I'd be surprised if it went anywhere anytime soon. I cannot wait to watch how they attack the rest of the season because they got the talent, they got the culture, and they lack the complacency. Georgia's going to put the rest of the college football world, I think, continue to put the college football world on notice. And it's so funny, man, because that was a thing early in the year where Georgia's kind of starting slow. don't look quite as dominant as we had hoped. And there was a lot of people saying, well, I guess Georgia just isn't really Georgia that they were last year. Opens the door for everybody else. And the door is still open for other teams. Don't get it twisted. I mean, we're sitting here in November. But if you watched the show, you came in here on Sunday mornings and you heard us talk about Georgia, and we said, listen, Georgia is a team that's going to trend upward. They will play their best football in November when it matters the most. Why? Because that's how Kirby Smart has always done things. That's how his roster responds to him. So, yet again, Georgia, number one in the country, and they're in good shape to finish the year very, very strong. That game in Atlanta against Alabama, I think we're going to that. We'll let you know on the social channels as soon as we have a firm grasp for it, but hard count may be in Atlanta for Georgia, Alabama in the SEC title game. So that'll be a lot of fun. Hey, quick shout out to y'all. Appreciate y'all being dialed in. If you're watching the video live, hit that thumbs up button under the picture. Get us over 100 likes. I already know y'all are going to do it, so I appreciate you in advance for doing that. But we have a tradition around here. I don't remember the last time we didn't have 100 likes before getting off the air. It might have been like SEC Media Days. Bottom line, got a nice little streak going. Testament to y'all. Thank you for that. Let's keep on rolling, and let's keep that streak alive. All right. So we call ourselves the People's College Football Show. And you can't do that unless you involve the people into the show. We say that multiple times a week. Y'all are as much a part of this operation as we are over here in the control room, behind the mic, in front of the camera. And so every single live show, we go to the live chat and we ask y'all, hey, what do you think about X, Y, and Z thing? Hey, give us your takes. Give us your thoughts. It's funny. Didn't get to do that yesterday. We were pressed for time, but most every single live show we get to do that. And not every single, but the majority of live shows, we hear from y'all saying, hey, what happens if X team beats B team and we have one loss conference champion from this conference, but this conference champion has one loss, they beat this team. So bottom line, supply and demand, y'all want to talk about playoff scenarios is what I've gathered. So put out a tweet or an X post, whatever you want to call it, on my Twitter page at JD Pickell and ask y'all what are some of your hypothetical college football playoff scenarios on a Big Picture Wednesday. We're going to unpack a couple of them right now. First things first, make sure you're subscribed. College football every single day. We appreciate y'all being dialed in. Don't want you to miss a thing. Great way to stay engaged is one, subscribing, two, follow me on the Twitter and Instagram at JD Pickell. With that out of the way, the first scenario I want to unpack, this is an awesome handle. Yeah, you right, 84. I love that. I absolutely love that. His scenario is Washington is the only undefeated team after championship weekend. So we're assuming a couple of things here. We had to take some liberties to get a gauge for, but he's saying, hey, Washington, they run the table. They likely play Oregon. They end up going undefeated. Magical run for the Huskies. So he has them beating Oregon State this weekend as well. They're in. What happens to the rest of the field if nobody else is undefeated? Again, we're taking some liberties here. So we're going to go ahead and assume in this situation that Alabama is a one-loss conference champion. So Georgia, they go undefeated. They get to Atlanta, obviously, as they already punched their ticket, and they end up playing Bama. They lose to Bama. Bama's your one-loss conference champ. We're also going to assume, for the sake of keeping this thing kind of neat and tidy, Texas runs the table. Quinn Ewers kind of adds some nitrous back to that operation at Texas. They're a one-loss conference champ out of the Big 12. So Bama's undefeated, or not undefeated, sorry. Bama one-loss conference champ out of the SEC. Texas a one-loss conference champ out of the Big 12. Here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Florida State, currently undefeated. So we have to assume they lose somewhere. I'm going to assume, for the sake of this conversation, they beat Florida, they get to the ACC title game, and they play Louisville. Now, we're going to say Louisville has to obviously win that game if we're having a conversation where it's one-loss conference champs across the board. So Louisville is your one-loss conference champ out of the ACC. And the Big Ten has to have a one-loss conference champion or just a multiple-loss conference champion. So I want to unpack that right now. So if they have this is tricky to jump into. So if they have a one-loss conference champ, that means Michigan or Ohio State lost this upcoming weekend. Ohio State plays Minnesota. Michigan goes to Maryland. So let's say Michigan loses to Maryland. They bounce back the next week, and they beat Ohio State. They go to the Big Ten title game. Here's where we got to take some liberties. If Iowa just goes sicko mode, we're going to assume it's Iowa from the Big Ten West, and they end up beating Michigan or Ohio State, in the college or in the Big Ten title game. I think that would eliminate Michigan or Ohio State as being a college football playoff team because they're not a conference champion. I think that's a really big deal to this committee. So, that case, it would allow Louisville to find their way into the college football playoff, or Florida State if they were to drop a game somewhere to Florida and then they beat Louisville and they're in. So ACC, I think in that situation, would get in. Now, if that one-loss Big Ten team, that's Michigan or Ohio State, again, assuming they lose this upcoming weekend and beat the other the next weekend, we're going to say it's Michigan for the sake of this conversation. So Michigan, with one loss, rolls into that Big Ten title game, and they finish as a one-loss conference champion. I think Michigan, based on eye test and resume, would end up getting in over Louisville in that spot. I think also with Florida State, that's another conversation to unpack. But I do think you would probably take Michigan over Florida State in that spot. But that's kind of a can of worms. I don't want to jump too far into that. Let's focus on the one that we had here. Michigan would find their way in. But Louisville, again, if Michigan or Ohio State are not conference champions, you have a multiple-loss Big Ten champ, then I think Louisville would find their way in, kick the college football playoff door down. I don't know if we're ready for something like that to happen. It would be just like college football for something like that to happen. Iowa, don't know if y'all heard, don't play much offense, but they play real good defense. So we'll see what happens there. That's kind of how we feel about that. The resume for Louisville, they would have a top 10 win. They would have a top 4 or 5 win against Florida State. They would have a top 20 win over Duke. Just saying. Now, scenario number 2, this individual did not tweet at me, but he put this out there for his following, and I thought it was worth us unpacking together as a community. Scenario number 2 comes from Joel Klatt. And some men, they just want to watch the world burn. And so that's what the scenario is. He says you got the Big Ten champion undefeated. So Ohio State or Michigan, they're undefeated. They're obviously locked in. Then you have Florida State undefeated, which we think will happen. They're obviously locked in. They're set. So those 2 spots are spoken for. He says then you have 2 spots for the following. 1 loss, SEC champ Alabama. 1 loss, Pac-12 champ Oregon. 1 loss, Big 12 champ Texas. And then 2 non-conference champions of Washington and Georgia. Now, to me, right off the bat, we can eliminate those non-conference champions. To me, it's a lot like, hey, you were good enough to be in the class. You were good enough to take the AP portion of this class. But the reality is you don't have the prerequisites. You don't have that class before the AP class to get in. So, sorry, don't make the rules. The way that this thing works, Georgia and Washington in that scenario, I think, would get left out. So, how do we go about unpacking this? I'll start with this. I think the committee likes Oregon. By nature of where they're at right now, being at number 6, I think they're really weighing their eye test pretty heavily. I think that win over Utah and the definitive nature in which they did that means a lot. And then also Oregon would avenge their only loss over Washington. So, their resume at that point would be a ranked win over Colorado, a definitive ranked win over Colorado, mind you, plus a ranked win over Utah. Again, the committee is freezing these wins. That's why Colorado counts. Oregon State, at that point, could be as high as a top 10 win. It could be somewhere in the top 20 win, depending on what happens this upcoming weekend against Washington. And then you probably have, again, what I just said. You avenge that 1 loss with a top 4 to 5 win over Washington. I think they're in. I think they're in personally. By nature of the way the Pac-12 has played, by the eye test, I think Oregon would be in. Disagree or agree, let me know. But then you look at what we have left. You have Alabama and you have Texas. This is just a nightmare situation for everybody. Again, some men just want to watch the world burn. Alabama probably has the better resume. Let's look at it. If you're freezing wins, which I think the committee is, I'll say it again, I think the committee is freezing wins by nature of Florida State being at 4 last night. Ole Miss is at 15. LSU was at 14. Tennessee is at 17. And oh, by the way, in this scenario, you have a number 1 win over Georgia. Best win in the country. I don't think we're reaching and saying that. Now for Texas, you have a win over number 24 ranked Kansas, number 23 ranked Kansas State. Potentially, if you win the Big 12, you would imagine it's an Oklahoma State team that's somewhere in that top 20 range. So that's 3 ranked wins. And, oh yeah, I forgot this one. You have a win over the team you're being compared to, Alabama. Number 3 team in the country when you beat them. So at this point, I think you got to go to the eye test because as of late, Bama has been slaughtering the eye test like they paid someone to take the ACT for them. With flying colors, they've been passing that test. Okay? Now with Texas, I understand they didn't have Quinn Ewers, but 3 of their last 4 games have been decided by 1 score. And they haven't been games where it's just a phenomenal competition on the other side of the sideline. It's been TCU. It's been Houston. Kansas State, I understand, was a ranked team. That's a good win. I don't want to short them for that kind of win. But the eye test for Texas without Quinn Ewers has left something to be desired. And in this last game against TCU, it's left something to be desired. So I think if Alabama beats Georgia and it's somehow definitive, like take me back to that game where Bryce Young was playing for Alabama and they beat Georgia and it was kind of like a leave no doubt situation, I don't know how that would shake out. If the eye test is even, I think you go to head-to-head, and I think you lean Texas. But if Alabama is the team that has a definitive, hey, they're playing the best football right now, they just beat Georgia by 13 in the SEC title game, I don't know how you would leave them out. So I will say this. I think what the committee would do, I think they would look at head-to-head pretty closely unless Alabama just made it a ridiculous final score in Atlanta against Georgia. And I think Texas would be the team that's in. We've seen so far to this point with the committee, they really value head-to-head. That's important to them. They want that to be a differentiating factor, it seems like, to this point with these teams. So what I think would happen is Texas would get in. But I think Alabama would have a very strong case if it goes to the eye test and if they end up finding their way in that way. And again, I just think the committee likes Oregon. But if Alabama beats Georgia, it's kind of an all bets are off scenario, just so we're on the same page. So that's kind of my feel on it when it comes to that scenario. But let me know in the comments section. Let me know on Twitter and Instagram what y'all think of that as well. So one more scenario we got to get to here from our guy Jake. And also let me know, this tweet is still up on my Twitter page. So if you want us to keep doing this segment, by nature of how y'all are responding, you do. I'll retweet this so we can get some more answers from y'all. A lot of good ones so far. Our guy Jake paints this picture for us. You have a 1-loss Alabama, SEC champ. You have a 1-loss ACC champ in Florida State. So we're assuming there that loss to Florida. You have a Pac-12 champion with a 1-loss Oregon. You have a Big Ten champion with a 1-loss Michigan. So their loss will be to Maryland, I'm assuming. And you have a Big 12 champion with a 1-loss Texas, with that loss being to Oklahoma. And then you have the non-conference champions. Spoiler alert, I think these teams are out. 1-loss Georgia, 1-loss Ohio State, 1-loss Washington. All good teams, like I just said, good enough to be in the playoff. If any of those teams somehow found their way in, would we be disappointed in the committee saying, hey, what's the criteria here? But we'd also say, okay, well, that's going to be a really good game. All of those teams deserve to still have a chance. However, I think they're out. This is where it gets weird, man. This is where it gets very, very weird. So I think that Oregon is in. Only loss is to Washington, and you avenge that loss. You would have 4 top 20 wins, one of those being a top 4 to 5 win over Washington. We already unpacked Oregon, so I don't want to do that again. I think Oregon's in. Again, by nature of the eye test, by nature of what the committee is telling us to this point, they like Oregon. If Oregon handles business, I think they're in. Then I think for Michigan, the eye test matters with what that loss would look like to Maryland. And you're saying, JD, they have a loss to Maryland? In this scenario, I believe so, because you're telling me they lose a game but still win the Big Ten. I don't think you can lose to Ohio State and then still find yourself into the Big Ten championship game. I don't think that happens. So you lose to Maryland. How does that look? Is that by a field goal? Or is that like a throwback Purdue-Ohio State game where the wheels came off somehow and Maryland just had your number that day and they run it up? I'm going to go ahead and lean towards the former in that scenario. I think that's the right verbiage. I'm going to lean towards that first option of it being close towards Maryland and Michigan. And then you have a top 10 win over Penn State and a top 2 win over Ohio State and a top 15 win. Let's assume it's Iowa. I think the eye test and that resume is good enough to get Michigan into the college football playoff. So at that point, you have the Pac-12 spoken for, they're in. The Big Ten champ, Michigan, they're spoken for, they're in. Again, in my assessment. So back to resumes, man. Scenario season. What do we think here? We got Bama, Texas, and Florida State, all as 1-loss conference champions. We're kind of taking some liberties here with where we think these losses happen at. But these would be the resumes in our mind of what these teams would look like. Alabama would have 3 ranked wins, all of them being in the top 20. You'd have a loss to a number 11 Texas, if you're freezing that loss. And your best win is to Georgia. Number 1 in the country, Georgia. So that's 4 ranked wins. All of them in the top 20. Probably a nice little message sent to the committee too. Like, hey, you sure you want to leave us out after we just beat the top dog in the country? I'm just saying. Texas would have 4 ranked wins. Their loss would be to number 12 Oklahoma. Their best win, again, we're freezing it, number 5 LSU. Or excuse me, I said number 5 LSU. I meant number 3 Alabama. I apologize. Number 3 Alabama. Got ahead of myself. Florida State would have the best win, would be number 5 LSU. They would have 3 ranked wins, 2 top 10, if you're assuming Louisville is a top 10 win in the ACC title game, and your loss would be to an unranked Florida. That's where this gets tricky. So again, to reemphasize that, Florida State's best win is top 5 LSU. Texas's best win is number 3 Alabama. Bama's best win is number 1 Georgia. So the best wins lean towards Bama here. But then you say, well, Texas' best win is actually the team with the best win. So how does that shake out? I don't know. It gets weird when we talk about scenarios, but this is where we're at right now in November in the college football landscape. So just to kind of, like, I sat there in the room and looked at this for a minute, and I was like, man, when it comes to resumes, you could probably make a case for any of these teams, right? Like at the end of the day, all 3 of these teams have a very solid case to be in the college football playoff. Just what I said when it comes to Alabama, if you beat the number 1 team in the country the weekend before you announce the college football playoff rankings, by nature of how this committee has decided on these rankings to this point, I don't see a formula. I don't see a method to the madness. I see a lot of people getting in the room, having a conversation, and saying, what do we think? And if Bama beats Georgia, what they would think, I would have to imagine, is that Bama is one of the top 4 teams in the country if their one loss is to a really good Texas team that they ran into week 2. Early in the year, I think that matters. If that loss came week 10, maybe a different conversation. But early in the year, finish the year strong, playing great football, beat the number 1 team, I think Bama's in. So then we go to Texas and Florida State. Both Texas and Florida State, quite honestly, to this point in the year, have kind of slowed down in their eye test passing. Like Florida State, the way that they started beating LSU was awesome. Texas beating Bama was awesome. And then the last couple of weeks, it's been like, hey, what's going on in Austin? What's going on in Tallahassee? Are we going to make it? And Texas has the excuse of, well, we didn't have our starting quarterback. How much the committee factors that in, I guess we'll see. I worry that Texas will be a victim of their own conference because in the Big 12 title game, I'm assuming they're going to play like a top 15 Oklahoma State. Florida State will play a top 10 Louisville if chalk holds. So what I think could end up sinking Texas is their own conference. What could sink Florida State is the way they haven't been impressive the rest of the way here. And if they have one loss, that one loss is the worst of these 3 to an unranked Florida. So if it's totally even, I think the Texas loss in this scenario is earlier than the Florida State loss. And so I think you would actually lean towards Texas. I think Texas would get in over Florida State. But again, the eye test, I think, would differentiate between those 2 teams. So, again, if your head hurts, you're just like us right now. There's a lot to unpack here. This is so awesome that we're talking about this right now, that we're talking about these 4 spots being decided on. So get at me on Twitter. Let me know your thoughts. Y'all have responded to this in elite fashion when it comes to these college football playoff scenarios. Get them in here. We'll talk about it. We'll put it on the screen. We'll break it down. We'll have a good time, and we'll keep the scenario season rolling. So that's where we sit today when it comes to these college football playoff scenarios. Check back in next weekend and have a pretty good feel that after this weekend, we'll have a different big picture Wednesday when playoff scenarios hit again the following week. So appreciate y'all being dialed in. Y'all have been crushing it on that segment, so we really, really appreciate it, man. Appreciate it. Hey, over 100 likes. Y'all are phenomenal. Big shout out to y'all. Again, the program handling business. Handling business. Hey, get those questions in the live chat too, so we can answer those as effectively and efficiently as possible. Playoff scenarios, whatever you want to talk about, we're talking about it. That's the benefit of being tuned into the live show on YouTube. If you're on podcast, we appreciate y'all too. Hey, leave a review, leave a question in the comment section or your playoff scenario in the comment section and a 5-star review, and we'll do our best to get to that there as well. All right. Pulse the Program series rolling right along. We've been through Ann Arbor, Michigan, been through Columbus, Ohio, been through Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So now we take the Pulse the Program out to Tallahassee, Florida. Some good weather, I think, this time of year in Tallahassee. I can't say that with absolute certainty, but I would imagine that's the case. Florida State, number 4 last night in the college football playoff rankings. The number to the left, if you've watched this show, you know where I'm going. Not as important as the number to the right of the logo. All about that donut in the loss column. So they're undefeated, and you got the North Alabama Lions coming to town. It's my lion noise for those of y'all on podcast and watching live. And then you're at Florida. That's all you have in front of you. Those are the only hurdles left. Now, at Florida, obviously, the more daunting of those two. It's going to be a rivalry matchup, and we saw this last weekend with Miami, how rivalry games are just tough in general. You delete logic. There's extra emotion baked in. But I think you feel pretty good about Florida State running the table there and then likely playing Louisville in the ACC title game. It's all right in front of you. It's a 3-game season. To check that box of achieving your dreams of being a college football playoff team. That's what all these guys that transferred to Florida State did so for. That's why a lot of these guys came back. That's why you have the number 1 returning production in the country. But what's the pulse right now internally? What's the pulse? 3 games left, more or less, before you're a college football playoff team. I think the pulse in Tallahassee right now is that they're built for it. They're built for a moment like this. They've built to a year like this. And right now they are built both literally from a roster and internally from a culture perspective for a run like this for where they are right now. Let's start with the roster. I said it already, but number 1 returning production in the country going into 2023 was a big reason why we like the Noles going into this season. They returned that number 1 production, not just from a team that found their way to a bowl game and did some good things and played above their skill level. That was a team that went 10-3 last season. Okay, so these dudes got some skins on the wall. And oh, by the way, you add some really key pieces. Jaheim Bell, been a dog for you. Swiss Army knife. Fentrell Cypress, done a good job on the perimeter. And oh, by the way, Keon Coleman has a very real case, I think, to be one of the top receivers in the country. A lot of people that I think would tell you he is the top receiver in the country. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a freak show in himself as well. When the ball is in the air, Keon Coleman, I think he's the best my ball guy in the country. So yeah, the talent is absolutely there. From last year and the portal additions that you made, credit Mike Norvell for saying we got to keep pushing the envelope here. We got to get better on our roster. We got to become more multiple. Now, the reason why I think this roster is worth talking about, yeah, you got some good pieces, but what football is about matchups, right? And I think this roster can match up with anybody else in America. I think they're the best get-a-matchup offense in the country. You want to double Keon Coleman? Johnny Wilson's 11 feet 7. You want to take both of those guys away on the perimeter? Well, Jaheim Bell's working in the middle of the field. Oh, by the way, you got Kyle Morlock. Oh, by the way, we got Trey Benson. We have so many weapons we can hurt you, and Jordan Travis has continued to elevate his game to where this Florida State offense is able to unlock all those weapons. Because you can have whoever you want on the field, but if you're not able to maximize those pieces without a quarterback, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So what I want to make sure we say about Florida State is I don't think the personnel will take the field against anybody, whether it be the ACC title game, whether it be the college football playoff. I don't think they would be overwhelmed by anybody they match up against. The defense also adjusts really well. Multiple second-half shutouts. Jared Verse is going to get paid a lot of money here in the next couple of months to be an NFL defensive lineman. They got all the pieces on that roster to accomplish what they want to accomplish. The second part of this, though, and arguably the more important part of this, they are competitively built for what they want to achieve this season. 87% production back from last year. Yes, they won 10 games. That's great. But they also won 4 one-score games. These are dudes that have been up against it, been in the foxhole, had to look down the barrel of a loss and turn it away and find a way to win that game. That means something. You can't account for the experience going through those flames of adversity. Florida State has that internally on this roster. In addition to that, this is the same team in a lot of ways, based on the production, that lost 3 in a row and then won 6 straight. You know how difficult it is to bounce back psychologically and emotionally from a losing streak? I've been in locker rooms like that. I've been in a lot of locker rooms like that don't get up after 3 losses, that lose 3 in a row, and then you're mailing in the next game. And then you're already predicting your next loss because of who you have to play against. Florida State, to respond that way, that speaks volumes to just the response mechanism this team has. And we've seen it multiple times now. We've seen it show itself within this team. We saw it at Clemson. Down early in the game, find a way to fight back, force overtime. Clemson misses a field goal. They respond, does Florida State, and find a way to win the game. Big touchdown pass to Keon Coleman. You can't overstate the importance of the internal makeup of this team. And the internal makeup doesn't matter if you don't have the talent. So the fact that you have internal makeup plus talent, I think Florida State can accomplish everything they want to accomplish. And the reason why they have that internal makeup at a place that it's at is based on leadership. And a big part of that leadership, whether you want it to be or not, is your quarterback. And Jordan Travis, we talked to him in the offseason, and he was really transparent with us about just his journey at Florida State. I think he embodies everything that Florida State is from a character standpoint, from a never say die standpoint, from a respond to adversity standpoint, because it wasn't always the Jordan Travis show at Florida State. There was a point in time where people didn't want him to be the quarterback. There was a point in time where Jordan Travis didn't want to be the quarterback. He's like, hey, I'll go play receiver if that's good for this team. Like, it's obvious based on the Twitter sphere that people don't like me. Like, I'll pivot. Credit this staff for instilling confidence in him. And credit Jordan Travis, man, for being able to block out that noise, to keep it pushing, to keep climbing, put one foot in front of the other, and to be at where he's at right now. Again, that is a very difficult thing to do, especially as a college student. In today's day and age, with all social media and all the voices you hear from other people, like, to block that out and to just focus on the game and improve, like, Jordan Travis deserves all the credit in the world. And to play the way he's playing right now, he is the catalyst for this team. Not just this offense, this team. They go as Jordan Travis goes. So this is the big question now that a lot of people are asking, like, hey, what about national championship? Can Florida State win it all? Full transparency, Florida State, I think, if they're on their game, if Florida State is playing at their A-plus level, I like them to match up with anybody in the country. And the reason why I say that really is predicated on what I've said about them for the last couple of weeks now, the wide receiver play and the level that Jordan Travis has shown he can operate at. If that is working for them, I don't know how you stop Florida State. Now, paired with that, I would say you got to be able to run the football pretty well, but I trust the defense. I trust the playmakers on the outside, and if that's just your matchup, you're milking to a win, that's how you win the football game. So can they? I think that's fair to say that they could. Will they? We'll see. We will absolutely see. You got to take care of business now in the ACC and against Florida, but Florida State, they've built to a year like this, and right now, internally, as a roster and culturally, I think they're built for it. So I can't wait to watch what they do the rest of the way. Can't wait to watch how Mike Norvell fires up his guys the rest of the way and how they keep it pushing. And Jordan Travis, again, all the credit in the world should be due to 13 for how he's operated this year. Let's keep it rolling now, huh? Appreciate everybody dialed in right now. If you could subscribe to the channel, we would appreciate that tremendously. Would love to have you a part of this. All right, now, huge game. Huge game in Corvallis. Washington going to Oregon State. Oregon State, last we checked, favored by a point. Yes, that's right. Washington, top 5 team in the country, is a dog on the road. No pun intended. I understand they're the Huskies. 7:30 Eastern, ABC. For Washington, this is a playoff game. You cannot lose a game and feel good about your playoff chances. Now, I want to rephrase that. This is a playoff game in the sense that if you were to lose this one, you would no longer, in my mind, control your playoff destiny to the same degree you do now. At that point, you're wondering what's going to happen in other conferences. Maybe you still do make the playoff as a one-loss conference champion. We talk about Oregon doing that, so maybe you do control your own destiny, but I think you at least feel a little bit more uneasy about controlling your own destiny. That's where we'll settle on that topic. For Oregon State, very quietly, still in the Pac-12 title hunt. If they were to beat a team like Washington, it would feel like a we've arrived kind of win, because they beat Utah early in the year, and that kind of put the rest of the college football landscape on notice. They're right outside the top 10 based on the latest college football playoff rankings. But what Jonathan Smith has built there, it's been slowly but surely adding to the foundation. Lay a brick, lay another brick, lay another brick, lay another brick. And over time now, people are starting to look over in Corvallis and say, what's going on over there? Oh, they're building something in Corvallis. Nice. You want to hold their attention, you beat a top 5 team in Washington at your place. Can they do it? We'll predict it right now. Big part of this game now is the tempo at which the game is played at. We talk about this a lot for different matchups, but it's absolutely true in this case. If it's played in the 20s, the score that is, favors Oregon State. If it's played in the 30s, favors Washington. Now, the way that you dictate that is what happens on the line of scrimmage. This falls a lot on the Washington defense because they have been suspect against the run, is probably the right word to use. For them, they have done a lot of early triggering at the linebacker level, meaning like they read their keys. They see that running back coming downhill. They see the offensive line go to a zone kind of look or a power kind of look, and they are getting downhill. Now, it's great if you want to get downhill quickly, but you got to tackle effectively. Because if you swing and miss, there's not a whole lot of people behind you because we're all being aggressive getting to the football. I love being aggressive. I think you need to do that in this game, but it has to be a lot of connecting if you're Washington when you go to tackle. Now, for Oregon State, they have really made a point, I think, to be Utah Junior. Like, you think about Oregon State, you think of line of scrimmage, you think of run the football, you think of multiple tight ends, you think of big human beings taking the air out of the football. And they've done that really well. 5.2 yards a carry as a team. Damian Martinez, one of the best backs in the country nobody talks about. He gets downhill in a hurry, so that's going to be a really, really good matchup. Him getting downhill in a hurry versus those Washington linebackers getting downhill in a hurry. What's the war look like? I think battle will be back and forth, but who ends up winning that war? It's all about who gets leverage in this spot. Because Washington, they would love to just throw a knockout punch. They would love to get up 14-0, turn the noise down in Corvallis. Michael Penix Jr. makes a Heisman kind of day out of it, and they're rolling. Because this Oregon State team, they're not built to chase. They can keep pace, but they're not built to chase. So you don't want to get down 14 points if you're Oregon State. Your offense isn't built to do that. As much as I love DJ Uiagalelei, that's not what they're asking this offense to do. They want to throw a knockout. Oregon State, on the other hand, they would like to choke you out. They would like to make it a 7-7 game at half with them receiving the kick in the second half, take probably 8 minutes off the clock in that first drive, score a touchdown, force a 3-and-out. 14-7. The ball is back now to Oregon State. They just took 8 minutes off the clock. They're going to take 6 more minutes off the clock. 17-7, and your offense having trouble moving the football. What does that look like? That's how Oregon State would like to play this game. They want to keep Michael Penix Jr. watching as much of this contest as possible. That would be the way they would like to live. Now, there's going to be a really good man coverage battle in this game as well between Oregon State's defensive backs and the Washington Monstars in that wide receiver room. Washington has 3 NFL wide receivers. Jalen McMillan, he's been dinged up. I think he's getting back healthy. Don't know if he'll be in this game or not and how much he'll play in this game if he's ready to roll. But they also have Rome Odunze. They have Jalen Polk. They are freakishly talented on the perimeter. Now, the interesting matchup here is Oregon State's length at the cornerback position. All of their cornerbacks are 6 foot or more. I like that matchup because of how much they're going to ask them to play on an island, because of how Washington operates offensively. They will spread their wide receivers all the way out to the sideline. And what that does against the secondary is it forces those corners to have no safety help. Like, just purely from a geometry standpoint. If I'm a safety, I probably have some run responsibility as well. So I can't just stretch out all the way to that 20-yard width of getting over the top if you're running a streak route, or if you're running a comeback, or whatever it ends up being. Like, basically, for the corners, you're on your own. Something to watch for. I'm curious how aggressive these corners play, because against Utah, I thought Utah did a really good job in man coverage for the most part, but it felt like maybe they gave them too much of a cushion. Now, again, I'm not a defensive coordinator. A lot of people make a lot more money than me to make those decisions for their defense, but I'd be curious to see how much up in their grill Oregon State plays, having seen that tape from the week before. Because I think the length of Oregon State matches up okay with the talent of Washington, and it's not a thing for Oregon State where, hey, just don't get beat at all. That's not a realistic expectation. Washington is going to get theirs at some point in this game. The game plan for Oregon State here is don't get gashed. Don't let it be a thing where Michael Penix Jr. has 200-plus passing yards at halftime with 3 touchdowns. At that point, KO, knockout. It's over before it even started. It's going to be about winning the war. Not every battle, winning the war if you're Oregon State at that level. Just need a few stops. Just need a few stops if we're the defensive backs. Now, something to watch for within that, what Washington does really effectively is spread you out, like I said. But when teams get spread out against this offense, what do? They all drop back. We saw this a lot against Utah. They said, we're tired of getting beat deep. We're going to have our linebackers drop, going to have our safeties drop, our corners are going to bail. And when that happens, there's a whole lot of real estate underneath that Michael Penix Jr. does a great job working. So for these linebackers of Oregon State, they're going to have a really big responsibility of, one, being able to cover in man coverage against those tight ends and running backs of Washington, and then also to rally up and fill quickly whenever they do check it down. You can check it down and have it be 4 yards. You can't check it down and have it be 14 yards, is the world you got to live in if you're Oregon State. Rally up, make the tackle, live to play 2nd and 6. You don't want it being where you miss the tackle and then he's up the sideline and they're 1st and goal and we got problems if we're Oregon State. Just don't get knocked out is the best thesis for this defensive plan for Oregon State. Do not get knocked out. Stay in the fight. Find a way to get leverage. Now, for Oregon State, it's going to come down to oomph plays. You know what I'm talking about with oomph plays. It's got to be a couple of explosives here. Because Oregon State, if they're just going to run the football downhill, I think that's probably the way you'd like to live. And if that works to a victory, like, great, let's live that way. But for Oregon State, I think it's going to be a little bit more of, we got to have something to offset the run defense of Washington. And the guy that I'm looking at to do it is their Swiss Army knife, all of about, I think, 5'9", Silas Bolden. Lightning in a bottle. They'll find ways to get him the football, whether it's on reverses, whether it's in, the intermediate pass game. Like, they utilize him because he's so explosive. What is his impact in this game? Is he money for them on 3rd and 7? Because there's going to be a couple of those plays. Can DJ Uiagalelei find his guy? Can they dial it up for him? Can you win one-on-one? Because Washington plays a fair amount of man coverage too. Can you win your matchup and keep those drives extended? I don't need the 80-yard bomb. If we got it, great. Let's roll with that. But I need us to at least keep this Washington defense honest and give us something on 3rd and passing downs. Need something to be that spark for us. Because if not, like I just said, Washington will stack the box. And if you run the ball well early, maybe you can wear on them. But I think over time, like Washington, I think what we saw against Utah was impressive with their ability to withstand some physicality. I think it's going to force them to be able to have some multiple attacks offensively for Oregon State. So here's what we think, man. I think we've seen Washington play teams like this and survive. We saw them play a physical Utah outfit, found a way to get it done. Saw them play against Arizona, found a way to get it done. Saw them play in a rock fight against Arizona State, found a way to get it done. But in this game, I think Oregon State controls the tempo. I think DJ Uiagalelei has his moment in the sun, man. How tough it's been for him since he left Clemson, kind of reinvented himself at Oregon State. They're playing really well. In this spot now, I have called Wolf many times. I have predicted Washington to lose several times, and I have been wrong several times. But in this spot, I think Corvallis gets rocking. I think Oregon State, again, controls the line of scrimmage in this game. They take the air out of the football. They make it a low-scoring affair. I think Oregon State wins this football game 29-27. You break down the railing, you storm the field in Corvallis, and I think they knock off Washington. We're calling our shot. If it happens, it happens. Great. If not, I'm sure we'll end up on a lot of hype videos and get made fun of. But we think Oregon State ends up winning this football game, and I think they storm the field. Be a lot of fun. So Washington still fighting for their college football playoff life, fighting for their Pac-12 title chances. And for Oregon State, their Pac-12 march continues. But overall, the Pac-12 chaos that we're getting right now in the last year of the conference continues to be awesome, continues to be much CTV. So we're calling our shot there. We got Oregon State winning that football game at home. And if that happens, man, that'll be a movie. That'll be a movie in every sense. And good for Jonathan Smith, good for DJ Uiagalelei if they get it done. And for Michael Penix Jr. and company, if they beat Oregon State, I would be surprised. I was surprised they didn't jump this week. But if they beat Oregon State, I think you got to put them in the top 4. That's where we stand, at least. All right, now, we appreciate y'all being dialed in. We say that pretty frequently because we really feel that way. We're going to get to the live chat right now. Before we do that, though, we got not one but 2 ad reads to get to. So, we'll do those right now, but as we're doing these ad reads, get in the live chat, let us know your questions, your thoughts, your concerns, and we'll have ourselves a real good time. So I want to start off with telling y'all that the hard count is brought to you by Rhoback. And Rhoback, man, y'all know how much I love Rhoback. I wear them all the time. I wear them all the time for a reason. They got the best polos on the market. They got the best joggers on the market. Performance crew neck. Little nice hoodie action. Andy Staples and I were both in here. And it was like that Spider-Man meme where they're pointing at each other because we're both wearing the Rhoback hoodie because it's so comfortable, buttery, what you need right now for crispy season. And as a whole, man, like they get us as college football fans. We've done work with them for a long time. Rhoback will not steer you astray, all right? So, going to keep you comfortable for long game days on the couch or at the tailgate. They got you covered. Rhoback has also been proudly leading the new NIL charge, and they've signed partnerships with guys like Cade Klubnik, Kyle McCord, Nick Singleton, Jalen Milroe. Audric Estime, I believe, has even told Andy Staples it was his favorite NIL deal he did was with Rhoback. So, use code JD on Rhoback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers. That's spelled RHOBACK, 20% off. All performance polos, shorts, everything they got. redeem that with code JD. So we'll take care of you just in time for football season. Make sure to check them out at rowback.com. A great way for y'all to support the show and support a great brand. I promise you. They will take care of y'all to the nth degree. Will Rowback. Just in time now as we sprint through the finish line here of the college football season. So that's Rowback now. And this is me like not doing an ad read right now. This is like just us talking. Rowback does phenomenal stuff. Never met somebody that had a Rowback product that said anything negative about it. So they'll take care of you. And again, if you redeem code JD, a great way for you to, again, support the show, let y'all know that you're watching, and it helps us look good for them. So we appreciate y'all for that. One more ad read here. The Hard Count is also brought to you by Game Time. And the good folks at Game Time, man, they also understand what it means to be a fan of a sporting team, or of a college football team, rather, is the better phrase to use right here, because we all have been there, right? We've all been there where you're outside of the tailgate, having a good time. It's like probably a 3:30 kick. You started early. You got there, you got the grill, you got the TV going, and you're just enjoying the college football Saturday. But there's a point in that day, probably right around, let's say 2:30, where your buddies that are going to the game start to pack it up, and they're like, hey, we're going to the game. And you're like, oh, I don't have tickets. This is where Game Time comes in. Game Time is the fast, easy, reliable way to make sure you get the best tickets at the best prices, okay? They have an all-in price for you. They show you up front. So it's not this thing where you get through the whole process of buying a ticket and then you get to the checkout and it's like, oh, by the way, that's another like $50 for your handling fee. What is a handling fee? I don't know. But make sure Game Time will take care of you by using the all-in visual for what your price is on the front end. Also, speaking of visuals, you can know where you're sitting from a view perspective before you buy. It's not this thing where you just kind of look around the graph of the stadium and you pick a little section. You say, oh, I think that'll be good. Well, you thought it'd be good. You got it for a good price because there was a pole in your way and you couldn't see the entirety of the game. Know your view before you buy with Game Time. Game Time guarantee. If you find a seat in the same row or section for less, Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. So, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code HARDCOUNT for $20 off your first purchase. $50 ticket? Oh, no, not anymore, because you redeem code HARDCOUNT, $20 off, $30 ticket. That's code HARDCOUNT for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code HARDCOUNT for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. We appreciate them taking care of us, taking care of y'all, getting us all to the games here on these fine fall Saturday afternoons. Speaking of fine, finest producer in the country, Nick Heavy Lifter Break, joining the show right now. Big Nick, how we doing, brother?
We're living.
How we doing, man?
We're living.
Late one last night for the boys.
It was a late one. We were in here 9:15, right?
It's a good time, man.
Central, yeah, it was a late one.
Just in the foxhole.
I go to bed at 9:30, so I went home and I was asleep probably within 30 minutes. So
you're a legend.
Yeah,
you're a legend, and the people appreciate you doing what legends do, handling business. You know.
J Floyd 11 JD says, "Make it happen, Nick. Come on." Okay, since he will cry and spam the chat if I don't ask this question first, and if I don't ask it verbatim, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Is that okay, JD?
I love it.
Okay. Well, first I've got to find it. So
you're good.
Just tell everyone to like the video or
you're
something.
You're good. Yeah, let's all like the video. I see a question in here. It says, "Are you more impressed that Florida State was finally able to get the run game rolling with Trey Benson, or more concerned that Miami found a way to limit the Seminoles receivers?" I think I'm more encouraged about the run game because Miami's defense against the run is really solid. They're allowing less than 100 yards a game right now on the ground. And that Florida State receiving core, Keon Coleman caught a touchdown, but I don't think he's himself just yet. Johnny Wilson, I don't think he's himself just yet. So let those guys get their legs back under them. I don't have questions about the pass game. Seeing the run game show something against a good run defense, I thought was the most encouraging, to answer your question there. A good question, though.
Yeah, that one is from Matthew. So thank you very much, Matthew, for getting that question in. JD, I found it.
I love it.
Should Coach Prime take the Michigan job when it opens up this year?
Oh, man. I thought we were going to get a Coach Prime Texas A&M question.
Yeah, we're going straight to Michigan.
I'll say this.
Cold yet.
I think if the Michigan job opened up, if he were to take an NFL job, this is Jim Harbaugh we're speaking of, obviously. I think your answer is in-house. I think you go Sharon Moore, and I don't think you think twice about it. You say he was our acting head coach for a minute there, big win over Penn State. The guys love him. The culture's intact. He's going to be a head coach at some point anyway. Why don't we just kind of keep the formula rolling and keep Sharon Moore there? Also probably helps with recruiting. So I think that's the way you go. The Coach Prime to College Station thought has been floated a little bit more frequently in the mainstream. I don't really get that one either. And I understand that Coach Prime is going to acquire a ton of talent. And I think he will be a head coach at an SEC school or a Big Ten school or, like the elite of the elites at some point in time, should he stay in college for an extended period of time. But right now, the proof of concept to me, with them probably being a 5-win, 4-win team, give or take, when this whole thing is said and done, I would be slower to pull the trigger on hiring a Deion Sanders to a place like College Station. Because College Station and A&M, they got to hit on somebody here, man. And as good as Deion Sanders is, I think there's still a fair amount of risk that is involved because you don't know a ton about what he's going to be in the long term as a head coach at the Power 5 level. So I like the Deion hire if you went that way to a degree, but I would like much more someone stable like a Mike Elko. So that's where we fall on that, Nick.
Okay.
2 for the price of 1 there.
2 for the price of 1. Gavin says, JD, Georgia corner Kamari Lassiter has allowed 6 catches over the last 4 games and 55 yards and has a 9.4 QBR rating when targeted this season. What is the effect versus Tennessee this weekend?
He's a dog, man. He is locked down. I think the answer to that is he takes away whoever you put him on. Like, will Squirrel White be the guy he matches up with? Will it be somebody else? I'd be surprised if it were somebody else. But I think Kamari Lassiter, the luxury to take away someone's best weapon, it cannot be overstated because it forces the passing game offensively for another team to play backhanded. Like, you got to go to your second option. And that's fine if your second option is a Johnny Wilson or a Jaheim Bell. But when you're taking away Luther Burden and your next option isn't as dynamic as that first one, like, you're in good shape. And then the game goes back to what already favored Georgia originally, which is the line of scrimmage. So Kamari Lassiter, you can't overstate how impactful he's been for Georgia. And it showed up again this past weekend, taking away Trey Harris, 2 catches, 12 yards. Dude is a dog, will be a NFL player whenever he decides to go.
Absolutely. Landon Fountain says, JD, what player this season has had the most improvement/growth in the last 11 games? So who wins the JD Bickell Most Improved Award?
That's a really good question. Man, the first guy that comes to mind is DJU. Like, how much were people talking down on him, and he gets benched, and he was the issue, he was the problem. Then he goes to Oregon State, and they're, for us, a top 10 team. The committee has him at 11. We think they're a top 10 team. All he's done has been efficient and take care of business. So I think DJU is probably the guy that I would look at. I'm trying to think who else would even be in that conversation outside of him. I mean, J.J. McCarthy, he wasn't bad a year ago by any means, but the way that he's elevated his game, people are going to throw that stat line against Penn State out there and what have you. How about this, too? If you talk about just a guy who has exploded, Jaden Daniels probably actually is my answer to this question, as I'm just externally processing all of it. Jaden Daniels, you talk about quarterbacks taking the next step in an offense, and there was a game, I think, where LSU threw like 85 yards with him playing quarterback, and there was the thought that he was just a good runner, a good operator of that read option offense. Dude has been pushing the ball downfield, and I think he deserves the Heisman Trophy. I had a tweet out there, and it said Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best player in college football, will probably be a top 3 pick, you would imagine. Jaden Daniels is having the best season in college football. He deserves the Heisman Trophy. You're going to say, well, JD, he lost 3 games, and LSU is this and they're that. I don't care. He has been dominant. He ran for 200-plus yards. He threw for over 300 yards this last weekend. He's a freak show. He deserves the Heisman. And from where he was a season ago to being now a Heisman Trophy winner, potentially, I think he's absolutely most improved, and I think he absolutely has made a tremendous case for himself when it comes to the NFL in the future as well.
JD, man, the questions are coming in hot right now.
I love it.
This next question coming from Tanner Martin. JD, what are your thoughts on the Big 12 changing the tiebreaker rules 10 games into the season? I get the rule was terrible to begin with, but it's a little weird they waited this long. JD, did you know about that?
Nick, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even know what he's referring to. I love that, though. I love that we're learning stuff right now on the show. That's good stuff.
So, Tanner, if you don't mind shooting that in the chat.
Yeah, let us know.
And then we'll get to the next question. Dallas says, JD, What is better for Oregon? Washington winning out until the conference championship, or Oregon State beating UW this weekend?
So we thought about this in our playoff scenario segment. I think you're actually rooting for Washington if you're Oregon, because you would like to have Washington be as highly ranked as possible, be a top 4, maybe even top 3 team if you can find a way to get that done if you're Washington, and then you take them down. Because I think for this committee, like I said, I don't see a tremendous formula set in place for them. I don't see a ton of consistency week to week with how they pick their games or pick their rankings. And so what that tells me is we get in the room and we say, what'd you think? What'd you think of this last Saturday? I'm not saying it's only last Saturday, but that seems to have a pretty big impact on the way that they go week to week by nature of Georgia being number 1 this week after throttling Ole Miss. I think if you beat a top 4 Washington, avenging your only loss, that would be the best look. If Oregon State ends up beating Washington, then Oregon State, I guess, is a top 10 team at that point, and that probably looks good if you beat them the last game of the season going into the title game. But I think you want to have Washington as highly ranked as possible. Even if Oregon State loses, probably still a top 20 team, maybe top 15 team, depending on how much you want to penalize them and how they look in that game. So if I'm Oregon, feels weird, but I'm rooting for Washington to be as good as possible, cork the bat as much as possible for that last game, so you can maybe find your way in the college football playoff.
Sounds good. JD, good for a flash round where I ask a couple of them.
Let's do it. Like rapid fire?
Yeah, rapid fire.
We haven't done that in a minute. I don't think we've done that ever, rapid fire. Let's do it.
It's a good time to do it, man. There's so many questions.
I'm going to answer it so fast.
Let's see how fast you can do it then. JD, first question. Cade Stover, the most underrated college quarterback. That's from Jarrett Barker.
Most underrated college.
Tight end.
Tight end in the country.
Excuse me, Cade Stover, most underrated tight end in the college football.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I Miller says it's Colston Loveland, by the way.
I could also see Oscar Delp. I'll say yes because of Cade Stover. Doesn't get enough juice.
Okay.
Does a lot in the pass game too for them, I think.
That's a big Michigan-Ohio State rivalry
Yeah.
in the chat on tight ends even.
Yeah.
Minecraft Arenas. JD, I know it was asked a couple of weeks ago, but do you think there's any chance now that we have the same exact teams as we did in the very first 4-team college football playoff, Oregon, Bama, FSU, Ohio State? It's more likely
Definitely
now.
a chance. Definitely a chance. I wouldn't lean towards it, but I think there's definitely a chance.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pick it, but I think there's definitely a chance. 100%.
That comment has actually aged really well.
100%. Yeah, it's a great quote. We'll talk about it here as it gets closer and closer, and if we get that, of course, we'll do a segment on it.
Yeah,
I think it's possible, more possible than we thought.
Okay, awesome. JD, this one might not be as big of a rapid fire. AAA says, JD, what made you commit to the college you attended to, and what was your recruitment / college tour like?
Oh man, this is a great question. That's tough to answer rapid fire. I'll give a brief synopsis. So I did not have the big time offers out of college that a lot of these kids we talk about did. I had 3 offers on signing day, and it was University of San Diego, it was Brown University, and it was Cornell. And I wanted to go to Harvard so bad. I was like, dude, if I get offered from Harvard, I'm going. The end. Period. Mic drop. Not even thinking about it. Not even visiting. Ended up not getting offered from Harvard. Was recruited until, I guess, December. And then they ended up going another direction. I said, all right, fine. I'm going somewhere we can go play and beat Harvard. Took an official visit to Cornell. Took an official visit to Brown. And to me, I like Brown. I think Brown's cool. Cornell was just a bigger school. It's like 15,000 undergrad compared to, I think, Brown's like single digits. And I wanted to have a little bit of a bigger college experience, if that makes sense, if I can even say that. And also when it comes to the football operation, one of the things that was on my list was I want to go somewhere where the people are valued and cared about, and that is what runs the whole operation. I've heard so many people get to college and not enjoy playing college football, which I was like, how could that even be a reality when that's your dream and you work for your entire life? So I got to Cornell, and this is a true story. Saw on the wall, it's all about the people, was something that was written on the wall. And at that point I was like, all right, I feel like it's pretty clear where I'm supposed to go. So that's a brief synopsis, much more that went into that, but that was kind of the end all be all for me, were those key factors.
Okay, JD, just a couple more questions. I think rapid fire is kind of done because this is another one that's kind of more or less a longer answer. So we'll do 2 more questions and we'll get out of here.
Perfect.
OG Gary, the GOAT, says, losses start from now, and no more undefeated teams will remain at the championship weekend. Do you think the committee takes the conference champs? And if so, which 4 are the ones you did? This is kind of what we talked about earlier. But
yeah. I have to go back to my notes, to be honest with you. I think that if it's Louisville out of the ACC and they're the one-loss conference champ, I think they get left out. I'll say that. Now, I think the Big Ten probably gets in. The SEC probably gets in. I think the Pac-12 probably gets in. I'm forgetting who I even said. Big Ten, SEC, Pac-12. ACC, I think, would be outside looking in, especially if it's Louisville. So that's my thought on that. I mean, who these losses are to also matters. Like, if Florida State somehow gets beaten by a fair margin against Florida, that's an unranked loss. You would imagine if it's a fair margin, it's by double digits, and that looks bad for the committee. But that's not how good Florida State is. It's just a bad day, and that's kind of the way this thing is shaken out right now with the expanded playoff we have right now in college football. So if you want us to unpack those scenarios a little bit more in depth, we have a segment in the live show. So go back to that and watch that, and there's a better explanation for you. Yeah. Off the top of my head, that's the only thought that comes to mind most concretely, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And same thing can be said to a question asked by Knack. Knock with an A. Go back. They're talking about Florida State. JD talked about Florida State for about 10 minutes. It's a really good segment. If you didn't get a chance to watch that, ask what are the odds, in your opinion, about them winning it all, JD. I think, honestly, you did a really good job of covering that earlier on.
I appreciate
if you've got
that,
any
man.
more comments now,
I appreciate that, man.
I'd suggest going back because it's a good segment.
They have the personnel to do it. They have the personnel to do it. Do they match up as well against a Georgia or a Michigan on the line of scrimmage? I don't think so, but I do think if they're on with their skill players, it'll be a game. Like, I don't think there's a situation where Florida State walks in, and if they're playing their best game, I don't think there's a situation where you feel bad about your chances.
Yeah, absolutely, JD. Thank you for that question. So I'm going to end off like this. Since so many people have been asking it, today more than ever, really no one ever asks this, but we're getting a lot of it now. National championship matchup, and make your pick, JD, and we'll get out of here.
I love it. Well, first, Nick, appreciate you, brother. We'll see you tomorrow morning. You're the absolute man.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for all you do, my man. We predicted this before the season started. We had Georgia and Michigan. We're now heading into week 12 of the college football season. We are a week out from Rivalry Saturday, which will be enormously impactful. I feel the same way. I still think it's Georgia, and I still think it's Michigan in the national championship. I still think it's Georgia winning the national championship. So multiple. There's no weaknesses within this team. They're trending in the right direction. Incredible culture internally. Not to say anything of Michigan. I think they still have all those things as well. But at the end of the day, I trust what Kirby Smart has over there, and I think they would play with an edge, and I think they would find a way to win that game. So probably a great game. I hope we get that matchup, to be honest with y'all, just because I hope we end up being right, because that would be fun for all of us. But as a whole, man, we appreciate y'all being dialed in. Let me know your thoughts. Get at me on Twitter and Instagram at Judy Pickell. Want to hear your college football playoff scenarios. It's been a lot of fun to do that segment. Y'all have responded tremendously to it, so thank you for that. We're back on the air tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. Final Thoughts Thursday to get you ready for Week 12 of the college football season. We love y'all. We appreciate y'all. This is absolutely awesome. We're going to keep this party rolling. We will see y'all